Greetings, friends. Again, I'm the Reverend Carla Christopher, Assistant to the Bishop in charge of Justice Ministries for Lower Susquehanna Synod, part of the Central Pennsylvania region in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I'm only the fourth Black woman who is part of the LGBTQ community to be ordained into that denomination in more than 500 years. And it is absolutely the history, the rich, vibrating, powerful history of resistance and resilience that is part of historically Black churches and denominations that empowered me to go from community organizer and activist to rostered leader in a denomination not historically centering Black people. So how did this resilience from such a long tradition transfer itself onto me? Well, I simply could not be a Black pastor without the history of the Black church. The very first collection of folk songs published in the United States was actually called Slave Songs of the United States, published in 1867, and it contained a familiar hymn that many of you may know. As I went down by the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who will wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Have you ever heard the story of how that was written? An enslaved man by the name of George Allen is credited with first sharing the words of that song. And according to his claims, it was written because the Black church was given to us, the Christian religion, by slave owners, by human traffickers who took away the original culture and religious and spiritual traditions of African descent individuals. Did that bar us from spiritual expression? Did that keep us from building community that nurtured the soul and could be passed down through generations? Absolutely not. We took what was available to us. We took what was readily able to be received in our communities, and we turned those resources into something beautiful that could inspire and empower our resistance against the very people who enslaved us. Many of those so-called Negro spirituals, like Down by the River, included codes that said things like starry crowns, the North Star, down by the river, travel through the water so that the tracking dogs on land won't be able to sniff you. These codes, these instructions were part of saving and building community, preserving legacy for generation, the very thing that the church does. It didn't end there. Did any of you know that one of the amazing leaders of the civil rights movement, Frederick Douglass, was actually part of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, an ordained minister? Also a noted abolitionist, of course, but it was Frederick Douglass who began some of the most powerful interfaith and faith-based community organizing, partnering with people from different denominations through a shared identity and a sense of resilience, gathering Black religious leaders and other collaborators to help create the Underground Railroad that helped thousands of people escape bondage, and using that pulpit as a place to share inspiration, education, and intentional, empowered community building was a strong source of Frederick Douglass's education, and also the way that messages could be shared across neighborhoods and across communities, told and retold from that sacred place of trust, religious and spiritual leadership, a kind of care that speaks to the spirit across generation and across other division, in the ways that certain forms of education or regional-based organizing could not. I think we all know that church-based and spiritual organizing, resistance, and resilience certainly didn't end with Frederick Douglass. A fellow member of the LGBTQ community, Bayard Rustin, who was, many refer to as the power behind the throne, a lifelong partner and co-worker, colleague, and co-conspirator with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was actually one of the primary leaders in the African American civil rights, nonviolence, and justice liberation during the 60s and into the 70s. Bayard Rustin organized freedom rides in 1940s and 1950s, moved to help organize the Christian Leadership Conference, strengthened Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership and teaching, was part of the organization for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and actually was a huge union organizer and another interfaith organizer, partnering with the American Jewish Congress and other labor leaders to fight for rights for unions and American workers. During the 70s and 80s, Bayard Rustin served on countless humanitarian issues and missions, aiding refugees from Vietnam to Cambodia until his death on a humanitarian mission in Haiti in 1987. It was the church and partners from the church that empowered, inspired, educated around, and funded Bayard Rustin's work. Even as an LGBTQ Black man, there was always a space for his action and advocacy, because the Black church's call to resistance against oppressive powers is not constrained by anything that might otherwise divide us. We've seen division today, haven't we? We've seen Rodney King in LA. A lot of the resistance and support of protesters and community advocates was provided by LA churches. The same around the death of George Floyd in Milwaukee. Buses of supplies were brought in by multiple local congregations. William Barber has led the freedom movement that eventually became Moral Mondays and the revival of the New Poor People's Campaign out of North Carolina. And our very own Drew Hart here in Pennsylvania out of Messiah College is the author of some of the most powerful books on modern day advocacy and proactive resistance for the sake of justice. These Black leaders are all inspired by the fact that spirit shares across generations, across cultural and locational divides, and betrays all party boundaries to show that we can be one in a faith that commits to freedom and justice, love lived out. Justice is what love looks like in the public sphere. And if spirituality is love, then surely the Black church and its active resistance is love in its purest form. There's a church in Pennsylvania called Mother Bethel, located in Philadelphia. It stands on the oldest parcel of land continuously owned by African Americans in the United States. The Black individuals who shaped and grew the city of Philadelphia, many of them find their faith roots in Mother Bethel. A preacher, an abolitionist, an activist, and an entrepreneur, their founder, Bishop Richard Allen, was a huge part of the Underground Railroad and abolitionist movement, and that legacy continues today. That legacy continues in many of the leaders I mentioned, even in myself, and it continues in you. The Black church is the heartbeat and the soul beat of America. It is where justice is birthed over and over again in an eternal resurrection, a source of resistance that gives hope and heart and possibility, as well as peace to those on the margins. And this Black History Month, whatever spiritual denomination you come from, know that you raise your fist even as you place your hand on your heart, because the resilient, the powerful, the resistant Black churches of America have made it possible.